Long ago, Lucifer formulated a plot to take over heaven from God because he thought he should be in charge instead, with this ultimately failing. The 1/3 of God's army that rebelled against him became fallen angels, more often known as demons. Some also claim that they would disguise themselves as the Greek and Roman gods. Some supposedly had children with humans and created the Nephilim, a group of giant humans that would occupy the land of Canaan. Now that I've given all of you a brief background on what fallen angels are, I can also tell you that most of that information wasn't important to this video, but we'll be featuring games in here that have a sort of fallen angel theme to them. In fact, some may argue that these games have some of those demons in them. Let's begin with War in Heaven. War in Heaven, oh wait, excuse me, the War in Heaven, is what I'll call Bible jank. Have you heard of Slav jank? Well, this is Slav jank's Christian cousin. He's well-intentioned, but ultimately pushes too far into making Christianity try to seem cool, but also preaching, and ends up sort of failing at both. Seriously, the biggest problem with Bible jank is usually the fact that they want to do some bare-bones preaching first, and then the actual game portion comes second. This can even count for non-game Christian media, since most of it is just as ham-fisted as all the rest.
Except you stay.
Developed by Eternal Warriors, who are well-renowned for such hits as this game. Also, I found out this was apparently supposed to be a tie-in to a book. A tie-in for a book. Now, I have heard of a game tie-in for a movie tie-in of a book. I'm not saying it's never been done, but it certainly isn't common. And no, I'm not going to read the book for this video. This game was also published by ValueSoft, which used to be a THQ subsidiary, which also means that we can tie a very loose link between this game and crusty JPEG David Hasselhoff from the SpongeBob movie game. And hey, I found the box art for this game, so let's take a look at it real quick. Okay, I'm pretty sure I know which one is the protagonist, this angel woman. Huh, this was rated T? I mean, I guess that makes a little bit of sense. I guess the demons were just a bit too much for an E rating. Alright, let's take a look at the back cover now. Alright, I already told you the story where Lucifer gets cast out of heaven. Apparently, the decisions in this game carry eternal consequences. Can we call them unforeseen consequences so that I can make the Half-Life reference? Features 12 levels of heaven and hell. A fully 3D non-Euclidean world. What? Outwit and outfight immortal beings with lethal weapons. So wait, if they're immortal, what's the point of fighting them? Exciting, uncompromising 3D action combined with spiritual lessons from the Bible. Well, hopefully this uncompromising 3D action will be great, because I'd just like to remind everyone that this was released well after Quake. Before we move on, I'd like to highlight this caption here. Each level is designed to educate and illustrate biblical truth. That makes no sense in the context of the actual levels, but we'll get back to that. Oh right, and for the sake of completion, here's the disc. I mean, the disc I really own for this Abandonware game. No, I don't. But let's get to the actual game itself. To begin, the performance is somewhat choppy at the best of times. Also, this is running on Windows XP because it's one of those games that doesn't seem to work on modern Windows, because Windows anymore is more like a bunch of stuff stacked on top of code from the mid-late 90s that also can't be bothered to keep backwards compatibility with programs and games from that era. But hey, at least Windows can force mandatory AI into your computer, so that's actually annoying. So we start the game and... okay, I'm pretty sure this is in 240p. And the mouse look is losing its mind. One issue at a time then. So I increased the resolution to a much more respectable 1024 by 768. And while that fixed the issue of the image being small, what it didn't fix was the mouse look issue. Also, in case you're wondering, no, this doesn't seem to do widescreen aspect ratios. Believe me, I tried. Remember how I said some of these games might have the demons in them? This is why. I even considered using the tank controls and just avoiding the mouse entirely, but it was just awful to play. Sorry, I'm someone who's used mouse look for first-person games forever, and that's not changing. But look, I'm sure this will be an easy fix.
The next day.
So the fix was to switch to VMware from VirtualBox for the virtual machine. I don't know how that was what fixed it, but finally we can play this. We get our introduction, which is essentially resist the demons and get to the goal. And yeah, okay, this game is only mostly fixed, but for some reason the game can be a bit choppy in some areas. I can't tell if this is the game being poorly optimized or the virtualization software I'm using, even though it should be plenty for this type of game. I'm sorry if that's distracting, but trust me when I say it's even worse when playing the game. You run around and hit a bunch of demons with your sword until they spontaneously combust. Most of these encounters with the initial enemies are pretty one-sided, all things considered. Also, I just want to say that I'm adding music to this gameplay for your viewing convenience, because otherwise this game has no music whatsoever. I guess you were supposed to play your favorite Christian music with this. Finally, in this level, you find a book which tells you that, hey, don't worry, God will smite all the enemies for you, and then this happens.
What the fuck?
Also, was that a frog? You get your victory text, but of course still have to find the exit. Hey, great text on this screen, by the way. And no, I don't know what the Boots of Peace do. I tried pressing several keys to see if they'd activate anything, including rebinding the key, but either they're bugged or the effect is automatic and entirely unnoticeable. Oh yeah, also be sure to save, since as it turns out, this game doesn't have any sort of autosave feature, not even from level to level. I learned that the hard way. Level 2 sort of sucks, mainly because much of it is a bunch of similar looking corridors and rooms. Although you do get the slingshot here, so it's nice to have some sort of actual ranged weapon instead of having to run up to every enemy and slash at them. The crosshair, however, doesn't work, so a lot of your shots are more or less blind. You get preached at some more moving into level 3, where you find another book, which I can only assume is a Bible, which this time tells you not to trust in your sword. That's code for don't attack the enemies in this room. Later in this level, you can also find a trumpet, or excuse me, trumps, which will send down fire onto an enemy. It might be a better weapon if I actually had a crosshair. Also, why are there multiples of these? What, can I only use a trumpet once or something? Does this angel get grossed out at a trumpet only she's used? Anyway, you can't leave until you've extinguished the fire of the evil ones, which is this little campfire they have going over here. You destroy that by just hitting the campfire a few times, and then you have to find the exit. Now maybe I'm just an idiot, but the exit was placed in the dumbest area ever. No, this area feels more like somewhere you'd go to find a secret, not the location of the level exit. Now I haven't really mentioned the enemies up until now, because they're not much to really write home about. You have the generic level 1 enemy, you have that but a slightly different color, and instead they fire projectiles at you, and these slightly bulkier demons that take more hits and seemingly do more damage. For level 4 though, we have something a bit different, repentant angels, where they can actually be saved. Now I don't know how theologically sound this is, but in terms of gameplay, honestly I saw this happen maybe a couple times at most throughout my entire playthrough. I don't know if this is a case where you have to hit the enemy a bunch of times before they'll surrender, or if it's a random chance thing, or something like that. On to level 4, welcome to Hell. I mean, I suppose this is a more accurate version of Hell, since instead of being fun, it's just tedious to get through. We finally see that frog again, which is a demon for some reason. The frogs spit electricity, which is actually somewhat annoying if you're trying to hit them from a distance to avoid them, because let me just remind you that there is no crosshair. I actually die in this level, mainly because of the frogs eating through most of my health. It was at this point where I started avoiding the enemies, mainly because fighting them was tedious. After navigating an interior area, you reach this platforming area where I fell, because the platforming in this game is rather clunky and awkward, into the lava, which didn't kill me. So I got to restart the whole level, and when I got back to this platforming area, I saved before doing it in case that happened again, and when it inevitably did, I loaded my save. Oh, just kidding, never mind, that starts you back at the beginning of the level again. This also really helps to highlight just how slow you walk in this game. For being surrounded by enemies, this angel sure seems like she's in no hurry. Maybe those boots from before would mitigate this, but again, they don't seem to work at all. I managed to find a way around that section with the platforms at least, and I find, wow, another angel. You get told to basically protect this angel, and oh boy, an escort mission. Well, actually it isn't too terrible, mainly because the game throws relatively weak enemies at you too. You get another sword, but honestly I couldn't tell the difference between this one and the standard issue one, so I can only guess this one happens to do more damage. In level 5, our next assignment is to destroy all the idols, which are indicated by green energy things. Also, we get another form of trumpet, which instead sends a cloud of lightning. It's a bit more useful, I suppose, and at least seems to be more powerful. We get to the idols, which I'm sure are no doubt stressing the engine to its limits. Actually, all joking aside, I think some of the environments in this game aren't that bad. They're obviously not the most inspired things ever, not even close, but some of them aren't bad. In one of the rooms, there's this area where you have to select the correct hole to jump down, otherwise you'll fall in lava. But hey, at least you don't have to manually reset this time. To get to some more idols, I defeat some enemies to find the Hell Train. I genuinely have no clue what this is even doing here, especially since the only things here are an overheal and some ammo for your slingshot. I feel like this was something that was made to see what cool things could be made, someone liked it, and it was just put into the game for some reason. Okay, remember how it was mentioned that these levels are supposed to educate about biblical truth? Yeah, call me crazy, but I don't know, I'm just not really seeing it here. After taking down some more idols, a few of which are literally just these cone shapes and nothing else, we have the Tree of Knowledge doing... Actually, no, I've got nothing. I have no clue why this is even here either. We finally get to the exit and move on to level 6, the final level. We have a rescue mission for this level, rescuing an angel that has been trapped there for 3 weeks by the Prince of the Powers of the Air. Guys, look, you can just call him the devil or Satan or something. This level is really just tedious, not helped of course by the lack of a run button. You have to somehow activate this valve. Oh, never mind, or the game can just crash, that works too. As I was saying, you have to activate this valve, which is something I'm pretty sure you only have to do one other time throughout the entire rest of the game. You know, later in this level. We get this lovely animation here. Wow, I'm pretty sure you could count out the frame rate there. Then there's this section over a lake of lava, which is fairly easy, followed by what I'm going to call the oven. And then we get some of the jankiest platforming in the entire game, going from the top of the oven onto these really small platforms. Finally, after a couple more short rooms, we make it to the penultimate area. And oh wow, what a view of the final arena. Really just soak it in for a moment. And then we have the big villain himself, the one and only devil, Satan. Let's see how he looks. Now, okay, I'm not saying that this doesn't look intimidating in the slightest, but he looks like a joke, like he had to pry himself off of his couch after having sat there for the better part of an eternity. The devil from Smiling Friends looks far more intimidating. Hell, Craig the Devil might look more intimidating. It doesn't help that the boss fight is a complete joke, where you go hit him with your sword a few times until he does this. This is followed by us activating another valve to help free the other angel. However, it raises the lava, and is it implied that we die? Well, I certainly don't think so, since it cuts to the ending cutscene before anything really happens. And okay, look, cutscene might be stretching the definition of this by just a bit. Also, since the character is an angel, you'd think she would be able to just fly out. In fact, why didn't we do more flying throughout this game? That might have actually been cool. Finally, you get the option of playing as the demon characters as well, but honestly I'm not too fond of the idea of playing more of this game. I don't think this game is great, but even just the addition of maybe a short flight ability, less monotonous fights, and maybe some actual music might have made this game serviceable. Like I said before, I feel like this game has the issue of trying to preach first and make a game second. It isn't the worst game I've ever played, but it was still pretty rough. But don't worry everybody, we have more games in here. with this next one being a game called Storm Angel. However, I played this, and I don't think this game has much to do with angels, of the fallen variety or otherwise. Instead, what we have here is a side-scrolling shmup game. And actually, this game isn't too bad. In fact, it's kinda fun. No, I'm not just saying that because of the previous game. It's just a well enough made game that's fun to play. With a caveat. This is one of those shmup games where there's one-hit deaths, which is something I've never understood for the genre. While the enemies aren't too difficult to dodge, certainly early on at least, some leeway would be a bit nice to see, such as a shield system. This is personally why I prefer games like Tyrion, but I still think this game is well made all the same. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of story, unless you count the 2000s tier backgrounds as containing some story. Overall, a decent game though. Next up, we have Dark Angel.
Dark Angel.
Alright, cool, this sounds like a game that's fitting for this category. So the story here is, well, actually I'm not entirely sure. So the condensed version is that there are good and evil versions of many things in this game's universe, one of which being between chaos and order, and the guardians of each. Well, the Guardian of Chaos got out and decided to do a bunch of chaos things, and the Guardian of Order kind of failed at the whole order part. So instead, the Guardian of Order passed on the task that was literally his job to do onto someone else, named Karina, who calls herself the Dark Angel for some reason I actually don't fully know. Oh, also this Guardian of Order split his soul apart and forced said person to go find all the pieces before she can do the job that he failed at. Oh, I'm sure this will go well. I mean, hey, at least some of these powers sound pretty cool. Teleportation, mutator, energy wave, psychic attacks, pretty neat stuff here. And okay, this is where I spoil the surprise. I didn't play a ton of this game. In fact, barely any. And that's for a simple reason. The controls are rather annoying. Not only does every single action need a separate key on the keyboard, but the controls just feel stiff. As much as I didn't like the controls in the first game we talked about here, it was for the most part your typical FPS controls. You know, after the possession of the mouse had stopped. What wasn't helping this game either was the lack of music, which I tried to remedy before eventually just having to give up on the whole thing. It seems to support CD audio, but it just isn't working. Maybe I would have had more patience with the game if I was either familiar with this type of game or if I hadn't played the first game already, but it was just tedious. I feel like there's a good game in here, but the controls aren't really doing it for me, so at best it'll have to wait. For our next game, we have Shade, Wrath of Angels. In this game, we actually do get some angels. In fact, we even get a story. This is a Slavjank game, however. Specifically, this game is Czech Slavjank. This game was developed by Black Element Software, although when I went looking, I'd get redirected to Bohemia Interactive. Apparently that's because Black Element was acquired in 2010, and some people said that the controls were somewhat rough. But let's see how well this game from 2004 holds up. For a start, it actually works better outside of a virtual machine, compared to inside the Windows XP one, where it has a tendency to crash. I'll also say that for 2004, this doesn't look too bad. Mind you, that was the same year Half-Life 2 was released, but when you're a Slavjank studio, you can only get so far before things like blankets might look like this from time to time. And we immediately get thrown into a tutorial, where the first thing I do is change some of the control bindings because, while the default controls aren't all that intuitive, I did notice that even with these changes, the controls still weren't amazing, but I figured I'd get used to them. That's foreshadowing, by the way. One tutorial later, and we meet our protagonist, brother. Yeah, we don't get a name for our protagonist right away. In fact, we don't get one for Brother's brother either. Instead, just calling himself B. To make a long letter a bit shorter, B wants you to show up in Rome so that he can show you some things he found which will change our understanding and perception of history. And of course, he can only tell you about all of this in person. He dies, doesn't he? After roaming around a very desolate section of Rome, we find his hotel where B said he would meet us. But uh-oh, it looks like Brother is having some weird hallucinations. Worse still, the hotel is haunted. Let's hear Brother's reaction to the first time this happens. Wow. Yeah, wow indeed. Honestly though, if I was in an abandoned hotel and that thing popped up in front of me, I think my reaction might be a bit more than a slight wow. There's an actual weapon to be obtained, I defeat some enemies, and then head to the only other place B said he might be, the church. There's also a secret passage here, activated by what I can only assume is a button near the altar. I wander around in the catacombs for a while, and then get a really slow ladder section. There's a basic puzzle down here, although I will admit that one of Brother's remarks down here was actually kinda funny.
Come on, am I some guy with a goofy hat and a whip or something?
Deeper still, we find some important looking engravings, which we'll get back to. Then I get hit with this section. Now so far, aside from the tutorial, there hasn't been much in the way of platforming outside of it. Well, this helps to show just how terrible the controls can be. You seem to have two jumps in this game. One where you jump half a foot and then drop like a rock, and another where you leap forward like you're wearing a long jump module. Sometimes ledges will be fine, other times you'll miss them. Sometimes ledges can be grabbed, other times they can't. I died several times here simply because of these two controls alone. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that sometimes the game doesn't even register you hitting the jump button. Seriously, this doesn't bode well, but, well, let's just continue. I finally grab an item called the Angel Heart of Faith, whatever that means, and as I leave the area, there's a cutscene. We see a sort of angel, we get some exposition where we're basically told that we need to help the fallen angels, like this one, by freeing them from a curse and help them restore the world to proper order or something like that. Honestly, I don't know if that should happen though. I don't know about everyone else, but I've never really seen fallen angels as the good guys. Oh right, also your brother is apparently dead. Sort of. Our protagonist here, Brother, doesn't even care about any of these fallen angels or ancient gods or what have you, but instead only about his brother, to which the angel seems to sort of ignore us. Anyway, this angel also decides to give us a servant. Oh, so like a guardian angel sort of thing, right? No, actually it's a demon. That's not even me exaggerating, it's literally called a demon in the game, and it looks like this. Yeah, again, I'm still not getting the impression that we should even be here helping these angels. I mean, Brother here doesn't even want the demon. Last but not least, we also get a sword, even though we already have a gun, because as we'll soon find out, ammo is rather scarce in this game. We get transported back in time, get told to find an item, and now here's where the game is finally well and truly starting. Something I'll also note is the look of this game. You've probably noticed this by now, but this game has that sort of mid-2000s Brown the Game look to it, which doesn't seem to change in this game. Honestly, I never did care for this look in games, and this game is no exception. Later on, we get introduced to our demon form, which is just so goofy looking in movement and combat. Speaking of combat, that's also rather clunky. It's okay with the gun you got, but any sort of melee combat feels like a game of chance as to whether or not your hits land, and just how much health an enemy will take with them. I'm sure there's some strategy to it, and I mean you can block, but even that only does so much. We get health regeneration areas, which is actually really good, and we get areas where you can save mid-level. I was sort of hoping that these health areas were unlimited because, oh, we'll get to that. Finally, another note about the combat. It plays the exact same music loop every single time you get into combat. Although, to be fair, it's a different combat music track per level. I mean, I suppose that's better than some games in this video where there's been no music, but it's also giving me flashbacks to Sonic Unleashed. Skipping ahead through a lot of tedious combat, we get this scepter that we were told to get earlier, which for some reason looks like this. Then Brother here gets carted off to the castle of the Gnostics. Anyway, these guys are primarily a bunch of skeletons, and this is where the combat is getting quite tedious. But hey, at least the platforming isn't incredibly awful as well. And no, this isn't an instance of me trying to make an impossible jump or something. Believe me, I looked around to make sure. The platforming really is just that inconsistent. So remember what I said as well about hoping that these healing areas were infinite? Yeah, I was hoping that I could cheese the dodgy combat mechanics simply by doing that. Now I'm sure that some might be thinking about save scumming this, but that doesn't seem to be a feature in this game as far as I can tell. So instead, much of this is just painful. I did manage to find an upgrade room, where not only can I buy an upgrade, but I also get my health and ammo restored. In this upgrade room, I went for the Ring of Immortality. I find a sacred skull with the Gnostics leaving a note basically saying, "Important, please do not steal," so of course we take it, along with others later on. We use these to open the gate to the boss, where the inconsistent combat really shines through. I use a very similar method each time, run in and try to melee since that's all I really can do, and it either turns out decently or terribly. Also, apparently there are combos in this game, but I never figured any of them out. Then, however, when the actual boss spawns in, because I'm not being swarmed by multiple enemies and can actually have some range, the boss is a complete joke. So now we get another of the angel hearts, or rather a piece of them. Ugh. And in this next level, I just had to stop. The combat had been wearing on me just a bit too much. I think if this game were something that I could save scum through, I might continue forward, but as it is, a lot of the game involves repeating the same thing over and over, either because the combat decided to not be in your favor that time around, or because the weird platforming controls decide to throw Brother here off of an edge. I feel like there's some potential in here for this game, but the gameplay in particular is just far too tedious. Also, I'm not being dumb when it comes to this combo system. From what I can tell, the game doesn't tell you anywhere about it. There's no help file, and nothing in the game's tutorial. So finally, I decided to see if I could find the manual to this game, and luckily I did. It's a bit blurry, but I can read it well enough. And while I learned a few things that weren't explained well in-game, honestly, this isn't the best game design practice, certainly not by 2005. Things that are borderline mandatory to complete the game due to how janky it is shouldn't be hidden away in the game manual. But luckily, since I managed to find the manual for this game, I'll give this game one more shot. Okay, let's see here. Special attacks. Okay, not all special attacks are available at the start of the game. Oh, how nice of them. And the manual is still a bit vague about how to do combos, but in short you have to press the guard button, and while doing so press the attack button, the magic sword will glow, and then you can do the attack by pressing whichever direction it says in the combo menu, such as pressing W twice for the basic combo attack. Since we're in the manual, let's read about this upgrade I got for the demon. Oh, okay, so you're supposed to use the spell like an item. Wow, it sure would have been great if the game had actually told me that. But okay, with all of that out of the way, it's time to try this game one more time. So given what I learned from the manual, I have a few additional things to say about this game. To begin, many of these things aren't mentioned anywhere in the tutorial, or in the game as a whole, which is bad game design like I mentioned before. The manual also tells me that I should be looking for the items of enemies, which I can pick up and use. Now, some of these actually do deal more damage, but it's hard to tell which ones do more damage, equal damage, or sometimes less damage, save for literally just experimenting. At a certain point, I just decided to use the stock sword for the bulk of fights. I did manage to learn how to use the Ring of Immortality finally, and boy am I glad I bought this upgrade, because it basically saved the entire game for me. Sure, the fights were still tedious or downright unfair at times, but at least I had a way to cheese the game. Actually, multiple ways. I think gradually as I played, I slowly got somewhat accustomed to the game's jank. Sort of. We'll get back to that. After finally getting through the section I got stuck on, which took way too long because again the combat is still a complete coin flip on how it goes sometimes, we get to the next area. This is the Realm of the Dead, where I need to find the Book of Sin, and also have a fight with the Lord of the Undead Knights. I got stuck at this grave area for a while, before realizing I had to fall off of what would otherwise appear to be the edge of the map. Also, hey, the ledge grabbing mechanic is still seemingly by complete chance no matter how much I try. Maybe I'm just not getting how it works though, so what I try to do is press the directional button as soon as Brother here starts his staggering animation. And, it sometimes works. Moving forward, I find an upgrade area, which I realized restores your health every single time you go in. Yup, I'll definitely be using that for infinite heals as often as I can. I've decided I'm going to save up for this spell, Wind of the Apocalypse, which sounds fairly powerful. Finally, I find who I can only assume is the Lord of the Undead Knights, and we have a mini-boss. Funnily enough, until you beat these other enemies, the actual mini-boss just sort of stands there. I mean, that's fine by me, that just makes it less tedious. It takes a while, mainly due to how long much of the combat in this game takes. Something else I should say about that Ring of Immortality is that if you time it wrong, an enemy can hit you out of it, effectively ruining your chance to use it, so be careful of that. After chopping down this mini-boss, we then get sent on another fetch quest, this time for essences. It was at this point that I decided to avoid more enemies than I fought, since even though I knew how to do combos now, that only made the combat a little bit less annoying. Anyway, I collect the essences, and get led into a room where I find, neat, a crossbow. While it isn't all that useful right now, it does become useful later, acting as a bit of a slower, slightly less powerful gun for the most part. It isn't the best thing ever, but hey, it's another ranged weapon. I place down the essences, and then I get this puzzle, which means I have to defeat the enemies anyway, so after doing that... Okay, what on earth am I supposed to do here? This makes no sense. Oh, and through this door I find spiders. Giant spiders. Why yes, of course the giant spiders are going to be a recurring enemy, so that's not fun. Moving forward, I find the boss room, which is luckily placed very close to an upgrade room and a save point, so I got the opportunity to heal beforehand. And the boss is...
the giant enemy spider.
Through cheesing the boss, I managed to defeat it on the first try, actually. Then I get the final piece of the angel heart. But whoa, we can't just go assembling it here. We have to find the proper place to assemble it. I get teleported into a tower where I can assemble the heart properly. We enter the passcode here, which I was honestly just ready to brute force until I found out it was on the book that was acquired earlier. I go up an elevator, and just before the entrance to this tower, there's another enemy. Not sure if it quite counts as a mini-boss or not, though. Frankly, this guy isn't even difficult, but just tedious. It'd be really nice to have some actual health bars for some of these enemies though, because fighting some of them just seems like a challenge in figuring out when it'll be over with. Finally, we assemble the entire heart, and I'm given the option of making myself stronger or the demon stronger. Well, considering making demons stronger is generally considered a bad idea, and I hardly use the demon to begin with, okay, I obviously decide to make Brother stronger instead. After this, we get a cutscene where we're told that we're a worthy enemy. Oh, to the other enemies, right? Yeah, okay, this just screams third act betrayal, and it isn't even subtle, but okay, whatever. Where to now? On to Egypt. And honestly, I have a sort of love-hate feeling about this entire section of the game. I'm glad we actually got a bit more color instead of more brown the game like I mentioned earlier, even if the visual design still feels a bit like that. And in general, this whole section does ultimately feel a bit more creative than the previous parts of the game. I think the combat is still rather annoying, but I think I'm just getting used to the janky controls. It's changed from incredibly frustrating to mostly just tedious. I find 3 onks to open this door, and then after fighting some enemies, okay, I actually got stuck here for a while, but here's what you're supposed to do. You see this piece of floor here? Yeah, you have to step on that. Okay, in hindsight it sticks out, but when I was looking for a door or button, it wasn't very obvious. Frankly, I found it by complete accident. We finally get outside, where we find more enemies to fight. However, the benefit of these enemies is that a lot of them are carrying arrows, so by the end of the fight, I have tons of arrows. I find both of these keys to enter the next area, one of which I had actually picked up in the previous area, so that would have been annoying to go and find again. And then I fight even more enemies, some of whom can apparently shoot through solid statues, so that's fun. We get back indoors and into this maze-like area. It wasn't the worst thing ever actually, just a bit irksome, and I got lost a couple of times here. There was seriously a lot of fighting in this area, and it got annoying fast. But finally, I made it through into the area I'm supposed to be going, and... well, that's several minutes I have to do over again. Next up, we have the Scorpion area. Can you guess why I called it that? Yeah, because now there are giant scorpions. Look, I'm really sorry if you're afraid of bugs, by the way. And oh boy, I think this was probably the most difficult portion of the game since before I learned about the other fighting mechanics. I know that there are other ways to do these fights, but I wanted to conserve things like ammo. After I finally got past that area, there's some platforming, and... okay, did I mention how much I don't like the platforming in this game? Sure, while I figured out some of the quirks of it, it never did fully resolve how unintuitive and at times simply broken the platforming could be. I still had many deaths in here due to simply weird platforming. But moving on, we get to the next boss. A giant scorpion. Okay, so basically they recycled the gimmick from the previous area. I will say, however, that this boss fight was pretty funny since after a couple of failed attempts, I managed to find a way to basically stun lock it like this, and it started to try ascending out of this plane of existence. I get the next angel heart piece, and also learned that in the next area, the realm of the dead, there will indeed be spells cast. In this area, during a fight, I found an upgrade station, and you know I used that for infinite healing. I get to a blocked area where a spell from before is read out. Yeah, it's basically just a matter of Brother reading a sign earlier on. And since I didn't defeat all the enemies before starting this segment, we get the enemies trying to attack Brother during the cutscene, which is actually really funny to see. After even more fighting, notice a pattern yet, I have to memorize this layout for the room ahead. I get it, well, mostly right the first try. After getting the next angel heart piece in the room ahead, we're going to have to face a boss, which looks like someone glued a dinosaur head to a human body. This boss fight is actually fairly easy though. In fact, I'd say this is the easiest fight in the game. I figured this guy would summon extra enemies to swarm you or something, or at least put up more of a fight. Instead, he just walks around most of the time, much of the time even just ignoring me. I wonder if his AI is broken or something. Next is the Forgotten World. Oh wait, sorry, this is the path to the Forgotten World. And this is where the game officially ramps the cheap meter up to an 11. Now this first part isn't too bad. For example, light torches to get blocks you can jump on to go across. Not too terrible, right? But then there's this part. Oh, this part. You have to get across this path, which collapses under you when you walk on it. But surely there's a pattern to it, right? Maybe the different textures represent which ones you can or can't walk on. Well, if there is in fact a pattern, I never figured it out. I just had to do this weird jumping pattern and make use of the fact that these platforms are still technically climbable. Even then, it wasn't a very consistent strategy. This section right here was just cheap. There was no real skill-based way to get across, more just dumb luck. But finally, I make it past this, and I get to this area, and during a cutscene, Brother falls off of a platform. We get informed that there's a spell for the demon that's absolutely required. Don't worry, it isn't hidden away or anything though. Speaking of which, I finally managed to get Wind of the Apocalypse. So let's test it out on a few enemies, shall we? Yeah, I think that was pretty good. The only catch is that since it uses basically all of the power at once, if you don't time it right and an enemy can manage to get a hit in, you'll be knocked back into the human state entirely without having done anything at all. Next we get some more story that we hadn't exactly heard before, like how there was a giant war and Brother is suddenly getting second thoughts about helping the totally not a bad guy person we have here. To which our angel thing gets annoyed and reminds him about his brother. So we carry on, get that spell which was mentioned earlier, and oh hooray, even more bugs. Even Brother decides to comment on it.
Bugs? Jeez, I needed insecticide, not a sword.
As it turns out, the telekinesis was used for basically this one puzzle. It'd be cool if it could be used on enemies and you could fling them around, but maybe that's asking a bit much. Later on, there's this section where you get chased by an evil block. Now you'd think this would push you into things like spikes, but apparently just the block touching you kills you. Somehow. Oh right, then there's another area like this later on, though at least the block has spikes now, so it makes some sense. Alright, now it's time for a new weapon, called the Claw, and it's basically a whip. Yeah, so much for Brother's comment earlier, huh? I managed to get this undead pharaoh into a corner, where I stunlock him and then Johnny Test him to death.
New episodes of Johnny Test.
Please, have mercy!
The final angel heart piece is obtained, but again we have to find a place to put all the pieces together. But uh-oh, it looks like someone is guarding the path. This half-mummy guy who summons... Oh boy, more spiders. I defeat the spiders, the mummy shows up, and I defeat him the best way possible. We restore the angel heart, power up Brother again, and finally he starts demanding some answers about where his brother is. And we're told that he's in Shadowland, which sounds more like a shadow-based amusement park than anything else. I mean, seriously, it couldn't be called the Land of Shadows? Nope, apparently just Shadowland. But don't worry, this angel super promises that he's there. He's not there, is he? Alright, and Shadowland is... desolate. It's somewhat open, though that could also just be because of the fog, but you also get this really annoying effect in certain areas. No, that's not a rendering error. It's this really annoying and nearly headache-inducing effect. There's also this platforming area, but luckily it's simple enough that it wasn't a complete pain. Mostly. Finally, there are these semi-transparent spiders, which are really difficult to see since they have a tendency to turn mostly invisible. I just stood on these ledges where they couldn't get me, and used the demon for the apocalypse power when it was available. We get an angel heart piece here, and then move on to... the swamp. So remember what I was saying about how Shadowland was more open? Yeah, well that's only sort of true. Particularly in this area, it's just open enough to be tedious, but still closed off enough to be punishing. So you have to find these 4 keys to unlock the next area, right? Well, some portions of the swamp you can walk in, while others you can sink to your death. Some of it is laid out well enough to where it's pretty easy to figure out, but at least one of these was confusing enough to find that I had to check a walkthrough. I actually hated this section. Sure, if it was more closed off like most of the rest of this game, it would have been more the same, but at least it wouldn't have been as difficult. Alternatively, even if it was open, at least don't make certain areas just random places where I can sink or even just die out of nowhere. This actually isn't too big of a problem for the first keys. But okay, tell me, where do you think I'm supposed to go from here? If you guessed randomly to the right, then you're correct. Lucky you. Whatever, let's just move on to the final level. So in this final level, we have to simply get the final angel heart piece, and then scale this area, where there are a bunch of these enemies that will snipe you with fireballs. I avoided the enemies the best that I could, and managed to reassemble the angel heart. But oh no, it turns out that angel was evil! Who could have seen that one coming? Brother gets all of his weapons taken away, but as the evil angel is about to destroy us, the 3 other angels show up, and apparently these ones are good. They also remind the other angel that it was the one that started the war that lasted literal centuries. The evil angel sends out the demon that it gave to you, and now it's time for the final battle, with only a sword. Oh boy, this isn't going to be fun, huh? So I feel I should say now that I just realized I'm not playing on the latest patch. This is version 1.0.1, though apparently there's also a 1.2 patch out there, but I didn't install it for this video. Now I don't know just how many things that patch fixed, but the game literally cheats in this fight. I say that because as far as I can tell, you and the demon have the exact same range. If you get up and fight fair against the demon, it will get at least one hit in every single time. There are only two methods I've seen to avoid this. One, you can jump attack, but that doesn't always work out, and you end up getting hit anyway. Or two,
and I think I found a way.
That's right, we're gonna cheat.
You can simply cheat back. We're going to be doing that second one. So there are these small platforms out here. You can stand on those, at which point the pathfinding on the AI will either break completely, or it'll walk up to you and seemingly get stuck, so that by the time you've attacked and it has a chance to hit back, it'll already have teleported away. After the first hit on the demon, you have a bunch of enemies spawn. Unfortunately, you really do have to take out the enemies because otherwise they'll fireball snipe you. After that, however, you can relax on this platform as the demon walks over to you and you hit at it multiple times. Oh yeah, also for a good portion of the fight, the music will just stop. I don't know why, it just does. After that, the angels tell Brother that his brother really is dead. And also now his soul is permanently stained black because he visited Shadowland, but he gets to keep the angel hearts at least. Brother launches the sword at this middle obelisk, and then he wakes up, and oh, haha, it was all just a dream. And his brother was waiting at the train station anyway. What a way to end off the game.
That's it?
So my final thoughts on this game. Well, to use the AVGN clip again,
Some might call it a mixed bag.
my biggest issue was the combat and gameplay. During the first couple of levels when I didn't know what to do because the game never told me, it honestly bordered on impossible. Every single fight was a roughly 50-50 chance of winning or not, except there were also lots of those battles. Sure, weaker enemies I could just spam through, but stronger enemies were difficult. Once I did learn how the gameplay and combat worked, while it was still really annoying and tedious, I felt like I could really play the game up until that final boss. However, when you have to basically cheat on the final boss because playing the game properly is at best annoying or at worst entirely unfair, that probably isn't a good sign. Oh yeah, also the platforming, which even when I was getting more accustomed to it, still would just fling me off a ledge or stop me in midair at times. I feel like there's a good game in here, but the problems of this game outweigh some of the legitimate enjoyment I did have. Right, also the game doesn't teach you half of these things, so that's annoying also. Well, that's gonna do it for now. Some of these games were good, others weren't. Although I guess that's what you're gonna get when you deal with games that have fallen angels in them. Well, thank y'all for watching, and take care.